Sérgio Vieira de Mello, Portuguese pronunciation? J. Uvige? D. I. M. Lu, March 15, 1948, August 19, 2003, was a Brazilian United Nations diplomat, who worked for more than 34 years in several UN humanitarian and political programs. The government of Brazil posthumously instituted the Sergio Vieira de Mello Medal to honor his legacy in promoting sustainable peace, international security and better living conditions for individuals in situations of armed conflict, challenges to which Sergio Vieira de Mello had dedicated his life and career. 1. He was killed in the Canal Hotel bombing in Iraq along with 20 other members of his staff on August 19, 2003 while working as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and United Nations Special Representative for Iraq. Before his death, he was considered a likely candidate for UN Secretary-General. Vieira de Mello was born in Rio de Janeiro to the diplomat Arnaldo Vieira de Mello and his wife Gilda, on March 15, 1948. 2. He had an older sister, Sonia, who suffered schizophrenia throughout her adult life. 3. The family followed Arnaldo's diplomatic postings, such that Sergio spent his early years in Buenos Aires, Genoa, Milan, Beirut, and Rome. 4. In 1965, he enrolled to study philosophy at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, but as classes were frequently disrupted by strikes, he opted to continue his education in Europe. 2. He continued at the Sorbonne University in Paris, where he studied philosophy under Vladimir Jankelevich. 2. There, he took an apartment at the Maison de l'Argentine, the student housing at the Sorbonne dedicated to students with families from Latin America. 5. He participated in the 1968 student riots in Paris against the Charles de Gaulle government, and was hit in the head by a police baton, causing a permanent disfigurement above his right eye. 2. He also wrote a letter published in the French leftist journal Combat in support of the riots, which made his return to Brazil, at this stage a military dictatorship, potentially dangerous. 6. Thus, after graduating from the Sorbonne in 1969, he moved to Geneva to stay with a family friend, and found his first job as an editor at the offices of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. 7. From UNHCR, Vieira de Mello moved to the field in Bangladesh during its War of Independence in 1971, in Sudan in 1972 following the Addis Ababa Agreement which ended the First Sudanese Civil War and allowed the return of some 650,000 Sudanese refugees and displaced persons. 8. And Cyprus after the Turkish invasion in 1974. 9. These early assignments were operational, rather than political. He was helping to organize food aid, shelter and other types of aid to refugees. He remained in the field, with a posting in Mozambique to help refugees fleeing white rule and civil war in Zimbabwe, at the time, still Rhodesia, where he was deputy head of the office but due to absence of his boss was effectively running the mission. 10. In 1973, he married Annie Personas, a French assistant at UNHCR, with whom he had 2 sons, Laurent and Adrien. Citation needed, the marriage fell apart only a few years later. After being separated for over 20 years from his first wife, he met his second spouse, Carolina Lariera, a Harvard-trained UN diplomat with a degree in economics, with whom he lived in a civil union until his death. 11-12. Early in his career, he also completed an MA in moral philosophy and a PhD by correspondence from the Sorbonne. 13. His doctorate thesis, submitted in 1974, was entitled The Role of Philosophy in Contemporary Society. 14. In 1985, he submitted a second state doctorate, the highest degree in the French education system, entitled Civitas Maxima, Origins, Foundations and Philosophical and Political Significance of the Supranationality Concept. 15. In addition to his native Portuguese, Vieira de Mello was fluent in English, Spanish, Italian, and French, as well as some conversational Arabic and Tetum. Vieira de Mello spent 3 years in charge of UNHCR operations in Mozambique during the civil war that followed its independence from Portugal in 1975, and 3 more in Peru. Vieira de Mello also served as Special Envoy for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees for Cambodia, being the first and only UN representative to hold talks with the Khmer Rouge. He became senior political advisor to the UN Interim Force in Lebanon between 1981 and 1983. In 1985 he went back to Latin America to serve as head of the Argentina office in Buenos Aires. 16. The early 1990s found him involved in the clearing of land mines in Cambodia, and then in Yugoslavia. After working on the refugee problem in Central Africa, he was made Assistant High Commissioner for Refugees in 1996 and he became UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator 2 years later. He would hold this position simultaneously with others until January 2001. He was a special UN envoy in Kosovo after the end of Serbian control of the former Yugoslav province in 1999. 17. Vieira de Mello was instrumental in dealing with the issue of boat people in Hong Kong. In mid-2000, he visited Fiji together with Don McKinnon, the Commonwealth of Nations Secretary-General, in an attempt to assist in finding a negotiated settlement to the hostage situation, in which Fiji's Prime Minister and other members of Parliament were kidnapped and held as hostages during the 2000 Fijian coup d'état. 18. Before becoming the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2002, he was the UN Transitional Administrator in East Timor from December 1999 to May 2002, guiding that former Portuguese colony occupied by Indonesia to independence. He was also Special Representative in Kosovo for an initial period of 2 months and was the coordinator of humanitarian operations at UN headquarters. In May 2003, Vieira de Mello was appointed as the Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General to Iraq, an appointment initially intended to last for 4 months. According to the New York Times Magazine journalist James Traub in his book The Best Intentions, Vieira de Mello turned down the appointment 3 times before Kofi Annan was pressured by U.S. President George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice. According to Samantha Power in her book Sergio, One Man's Fight to Save the World, Vieira de Mello met Bush at a meeting in March 2003, at which the two men discussed the human rights situation in the Guantanamo Bay detention camp, a controversial issue for the United States. In June 2003, Vieira de Mello was part of a team responsible for inspecting Abu Ghraib prison before it was rebuilt. 19. Vieira de Mello was working as United Nations Special Representative for Iraq when he was killed 20, in the Canal Hotel bombing. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a leader of the al-Qaeda terrorist organization, claimed responsibility for the blast. 21. A communique from al-Qaeda said that de Mello was assassinated because he had helped East Timor become an independent state, thereby stealing territory from the Islamic Caliphate.